You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
On this special edition of the Cabral Concept, this is episode 900, and I've literally been waiting 900 shows now to be able to bring you the true concepts of Ayurveda and Ayurvedic medicine. This to me is a really special occasion. I've honestly been waiting so long to try to pull this topic together because it's so in-depth. There's so much to really go over. And what I want to do is I wanted to create a cohesive structure so that we could follow along. We could really start with Ayurvedic medicine from the beginning, understand its concepts, understand how to apply it in daily life, and truly go on to either lose the weight, heal your body, get well, and go on to live longer, stronger. This is what it did for me. So about 20 plus years ago, I was suffering from a mystery-based illness. Conventional medicine could not figure out what was going on with my body. I saw the best specialists in the world, literally the best specialists in the world in Boston, Massachusetts. Trust me, we have MIT, we have Harvard, we have Tufts University, we have Beth Israel, we have Brigham Women's, we have Mass General Hospital. These are the top hospitals, the top practitioners, the top doctors in the world. Now, of course, there's other great doctors all over the world, but we cannot deny how fantastic these specialists are. But each one of them, even with their own brilliance, could not figure out what was going on with my body. It was not for almost 2 years later that they actually diagnosed with me with multiple diseases. And I've spoken about this before, and everyone likes to ask, what is that disease that you had? A lot of times it's honestly not even worth mentioning. And the reason is, as you've heard me say before, a dis-ease of the body is exactly that. It's the body out of ease. That's what we're going to talk about today. That is what Ayurveda is all about. That is what the brilliance of Ayurveda is allowed to do. It's allowed to shine through by showing you what those imbalances are. Where conventional medicine, it just doesn't cover this topic at all. But what conventional medicine did was it diagnosed me with a disease, right? This is after I went to functional medicine doctors, after they started doing saliva hormone-based tests. They were doing the organic acids test, the stool tests. They would do the food sensitivity test. They did all these great tests, hair tissue mineral analysis. And they found out these subtle imbalances. And then when I went back to my conventional medicine doctors, they said, oh, okay, well, why don't we test you for this? And they found out, okay, you have Addison's disease. You have chronic fatigue immunodysfunction, right? So it's CFIDS. You have POTS. Essentially what that means is I could not literally stand up without feeling like I was going to pass out and get dizzy. And I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without my heart rate racing through my chest. So bad at times that I would have to literally sit down after about 6 or 8 steps, collect myself, or even lie down in order for my heart rate to come back to normal because it would feel like it was going to pulsate through my chest. And again, went on to have rheumatoid arthritis, so autoimmune-based issues that affected my thumb joints, affected my elbows. I had type 2 diabetes where I failed that glucose tolerance test. Many, many other issues with my body. Essentially, my body was shutting down. I'm going to explain that later today. It was shutting down and there was no help for me. Eventually, I was put on additional pharmaceutical-based drugs. I was put on the Cortef. I was put on Florinef. I was put on all sorts of things for me to help to mask the symptoms I was having or to regulate my body artificially. That's what I dealt with for another couple of years. And I started to get deeper into this whole thing of orthomolecular medicine, which is healing the body with vitamins and minerals. I started to get more into bioregulatory medicine, looking at the imbalances within my body. I looked into functional medicine. All of these things make up naturopathy. But when I started to get into the advanced lab testing, when I started to actually test my body and look on a hair tissue mineral analysis and see that 4 low, see how depleted my minerals are, see how depleted my electrolytes were, I began to see the connection. I felt low. I had very low minerals. I had low sodium. It makes sense with POTS, right? And I started to do my saliva-based hormone test. I looked at that and I saw the low cortisol, of course, and then I went and got the actual diagnosis of Addison's disease, where my body was not producing cortisol even when stimulated under a specific blood-based test. So I saw all of those things, and they were great, and I started to heal my body. I did start to get better with all of that work, and it felt great. But the problem was I kept relapsing, right? I would get better, and I would get this false hope. I was like, okay, I'm getting better, and then no, I would crash, and I would get sick again and again and again. And then November would come, and then November through March, sick the entire winter. Chronic sinus infections, pneumonia almost every single winter during my early 20s, and even one year in my later 20s as well, where I still hadn't totally pulled it all together. And then came along Ayurvedic medicine. By chance, it's always by chance, right? I pick up a book because I'm deep into reading, right? So when doctors couldn't help me, when they told my family that he's either going to have to get worse and we'll be able to diagnose with him with a specific disease, which of course eventually they did, and then we can start treating him with pharmaceutical drugs, right? Or some type of surgery or whatever it might be. Or you're just going to have to then go about your life and live this way. And for a 17-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid, that's brutal. This is supposed to be your prime years. This is supposed to be literally the time of your life. And I'm dealing with swollen glands in my neck, and my sinuses are all congested, and every little if I just didn't get enough sleep, all of a sudden, again, I would get that head cold. I would get the ear, nose, and throat-based issues, and that was my life. That was my life for many years. Flu-like symptoms, all the joints hurt, all of these specific things, and I was told I was going to have to live like that. And I decided that was not good enough for me. And unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't the internet. I should say fortunately, because what's happening now, and I'm going to talk about this with Ayurvedic medicine as well, we have the ability to go broad but very shallow. We read all these different topics, and then all of a sudden we feel like we have it, but we don't, because there are layers to these things, and it's peeling back that onion so that when you get to the core, when you get to the essence, you know this inside and out, and you can apply it in every area of your life, and that's what I want to go over today, because Ayurvedic medicine is so much more than just healing the body physically. There's so much to do with it mentally, and really overall permeates your entire life. But what I can say is this: when I read that first book on Ayurvedic medicine, I said, I don't fully get it yet. I don't fully understand it, but I know there's something to this. That led to the next book, and I just kept reading. And finally, I got to a book that my mentor, Dr. Pete, wrote. And when I read that book, it was written in a real-world-based style, which I've now tried to model my practice after that, like really speaking to people, not as some egomaniac, egomaniacal-based doctor or something like that. It's just letting people know, like, listen, I get it. I've been there. I understand where you're at. Here's what you're missing, right? Here's what you're missing. And I felt like she talked to me in that way. For whatever reason, again, like I'm that type of person, I said, you know what? I'm going to see if I can connect with this doctor. I don't even know if she still practices medicine. But what I did was I contacted her. And about a week or so later, just again, like all the stars aligned, she emailed me back. And when she emailed me back, I said, this is it. This is it. I know it's it. And she said, I still have a practice, and it's in Maine. And I said, okay, great. Where in Maine? And she said, Camden. I said, okay, great. How do I get there? And essentially what I did was I found a bus, and I took a bus from Boston to Maine as a young 20-year-old, right, or mid-20-year-old. And that's what I did. I met her there. She spoke to me for about 2 hours. It was absolutely amazing. And she started to teach me because she understood that I knew about the labs. I mean, I had not gone back yet for my degree in naturopathy, right? I had not gone back yet, but I had studied thousands of books, and she could see that. And she said, here's what you're missing. And she began to explain the world of Ayurveda. And from there, that is what took me on the path to truly getting well. Not only did I heal my body, I went on to say, how did you learn all this? And so that's what I wanted to do. And of course, I went back and I got my degree, and I studied all over the world. And I studied in India multiple times. And I studied in Sri Lanka, which is a slightly different version of Ayurvedic medicine. And then I studied, of course, around the world, and I studied in traditional Chinese medicine, which has its beginnings actually in Ayurvedic medicine. And because not only did they trade goods between India and China, but they also traded information along that Silk Road. And the other thing as well is when I studied overseas and in Europe, a lot of the foundations for a lot of the naturopaths and natural health doctors or integrative doctors are also in Ayurvedic medicine. So it's this beautiful symphony between state-of-the-art and also the older school methods of Ayurvedic medicine. Please do keep in mind, as I'm talking and teaching about Ayurvedic medicine, it's taught to this day in India. It's taught, in other places as well. And I actually applied to one of the first schools out in LA that was going to be, it's called a BAMS degree, and that's what it is for Ayurvedic-based doctors, the BAMS. But the problem is this, is that it was going to be a video chat basically between India and here, and they didn't know that they had it fully together yet. I mean, it could be amazing, but it's not there yet. So to my knowledge, there is not a school in the United States where you get that BAMS degree. But of course, if you wanted to go overseas, you can do that. And a couple Americans actually do study, and they go on to become Ayurvedic doctors in India. And there's amazing places. So I studied in Kerala, and I was in Mysore, and I was literally all over India. I mean, it's funny because I have a lot of friends, and they have lineage from India, and they haven't even been to all the different places that I have. So it's a lot of fun being able to share those stories with them. But what I want to do today is I want to explain to anyone. So if your goal literally is health-based emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, Ayurveda touches on that. You have to understand that Ayurveda has been turned into this thing of Ayurvedic medicine, and that's one branch. You have to understand. We're going to talk about this today. There's 8 branches of Ayurvedic medicine. I'm going to review them with you today. But what I want to say is this, is that Ayurveda literally translates to the science of life, or the truth of life, or knowledge of life. It is the key. It's the key to everything in life. It goes back to the great Tao, and it goes back to the yin-yang symbol. You have to understand that life as we know it, we know how to fix things. We honestly do. We know how to fix everything in this world. The secrets lie in the details. But in the macro, which is what we're talking about today, is that what we are taught in Ayurvedic medicine is about balance. It's about this thing. When I was reading and studying much, I got deep into philosophy of German-based medicine called bioregulatory medicine. I've talked about that in the past, and you can literally go to stephencabral.com/podcasts. That's where all previous 900 podcasts are. That's where they live. And there's a search box, and you can type it in. And so if you want, you could type in bioregulatory, and you would actually see previous podcasts on bioregulatory medicine. Or if you actually type in homotoxicology, all right, homotoxicology, that's where I've done my detailed work in bioregulatory medicine. So I was certified in bioregulatory medicine when I was going for my degree. Because for me, is you have to understand, this is an absolute obsession. Like, this is not a normal person studying something. This was a person who was given the best way to say it is a terminal disease. I was given this thing saying, you're not going to recover from myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is essentially that flu-like symptoms where there was no energy. There was nothing left. I couldn't even play a pickup game of basketball with my friends because I would be sick the next day. There was nothing left to my body. There was no reserves. There was no health. There was no balance. I was depleted beyond measure. I had so much brain fog, I would get hot flashes during the day. Do you understand how insane that is for an 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid to be sitting there in class because I had to leave school, and when I came back, just because they were threatening for me not to graduate from high school. And this is a kid I played 3 sports in high school. I loved every minute of it. I was at National Honor Society, and they were threatening to kick me out of National Honor Society. I couldn't play sports anymore. I couldn't think. I had brain fog taking the SATs. I mean, it's so demoralizing. I was in the lowest point in my life. But from that low point, and that low point lasted for years, that's the thing. The reason this has become an obsession, it's a true obsession, is because I do not want anyone to ever have to go through that. No, I don't want anyone to, because no one deserves that. That's the truth. And I don't believe I deserved it either, because there was an answer. It was there the day I got sick, had I been in tune with or given this information. But I hadn't. No one had taught it to me. There was no real internet. It was just the beginning of the internet, and I didn't come from necessarily a family that had a computer at home. So here's the deal. How would I ever figured it out? I wouldn't have unless someone had shared a alternative doctor's name, and that alternative is in air quotes because there is no alternative to alternative medicine unless you don't want to get well. Because if you want to go down the conventional medicine route, which again, don't get me wrong, I love conventional medicine. I love conventional medicine for acute care. And if you're dealing with bilateral pneumonia, a staph infection, you're dealing with some type of surgery that needs to be done, right? Some acute-based instance. You're having a heart attack, a stroke, please go to your emergency room. You deserve the best of the best, and that is, at hospitals. And I do have the most amazing hospital around me. But I'll tell you this, if you're dealing with an autoimmune issue, you're dealing with something like alopecia, you're dealing with a digestive issue, you are not going to find the answer that you're looking for. So I want to save you that time. And I don't mean to be mean towards conventional medicine because, again, they're the best at one thing, and that's acute-based medicine, right? Naturopathy is not the best at acute-based medicine. So I'm not going to lie to you. That's not the point. The point is to share the truth with you. The truth is that chronic-based diseases of the body need to really be handled by a natural health practitioner, okay? They can be an amazing health coach. They can be a dietitian. They can be a naturopath. They can be an acupuncturist. They can be a chiropractor. It's whoever you feel is the right fit for you. And that's not my job to tell you that. My job to do right now today is to teach you what to look for, to teach you how to understand this philosophy so that I hope one day you can teach others. That's the whole point of this. The last 900 shows have been leading up to today. They have been the foundation for what we're going to talk about in Ayurvedic medicine, because we're going to start to take things from today's episode way past episode 1000. We're going to take this to the next level. What I would love you to do is be able to go back, listen to previous shows. They're about 25 minutes long. I understand there's a lot of them, but here's the deal, that this is a lifetime of knowledge I've tried to accumulate. It's not my knowledge. I don't own it. What I'm trying to do is now share it with you. If I can tell you one thing that I've done, it's that I accumulate this knowledge, and I will always keep accumulating that knowledge. And then I try to assimilate into one package. And again, I've done that with the Rain Barrel Effect. My book, The Rain Barrel Effect, pulls all of this together. And again, 100% of all profits from that book are donated to charity. And that's because I do not believe information should ever be held back. And I will never do that. So when people tell me like this information is, better than what I might pay for in a book, that makes me really happy. And it does. And again, I'm really grateful to be in this position and truly blessed, because I had to go through a really rough time to be able to accumulate this information. But now I understand I went through that rough time to get me to where I am today, to live my purpose. I have nothing beside this. This is my purpose, right? I mean, of course, we're not saying the other side of my life, which is my family and my loved ones. I mean, that is truly amazing, right? And I find balance between the two, and I'll be talking about that later as well. And I try to share that with you on our Mindset and Motivation Mondays. But as I'm leading right now into Ayurveda, you have to understand that this is why I believe I'm here. And so this isn't going to stop with 900 podcasts. And it's not going to stop with 2,000 podcasts. And it's only going to grow. It's going to grow into an entire online content media production, essentially. I want to have an actual TV show, and I haven't shared this before, but why not share it today? I didn't even know I was going to talk about this today. But I want to be able to invite great doctors from overseas. I want to be able to go overseas and show you the clinics in India and in Sri Lanka. I want to be able to show you some of the hospitals that I was able to see when I was in Beijing, when I did study and was interning at these hospitals as one of the residents there. And it was amazing because I got to work with these great doctors. But you would never get to hear from them if I was not be able to, or someone like myself, because of course I'm not the only one. I'm just one person of many. But if there's enough of us out there, and I'm hoping you'll be that same voice as well, if there's enough of us out there teaching others, well, then you don't have to go through, and they don't have to go through what I did, or maybe you're going through right now. So let's get into this, because I could talk about this all day. So let's get into this right now. We know that Ayurvedic medicine literally translates to the science of, or truth of life, okay? It is the knowledge of life, and that's all of life. So a lot of people forget that Ayurvedic medicine is actually in 8 branches. There are 8 branches of Ayurveda, and there's this. I'll get more into the deep parts of Ayurveda, but I don't want this to sound woo-woo at all today, because people will get turned off, and it should not be about that. But they have some beautiful rituals, and they have some beautiful deities and things like that I do want to share with you in the future. But I want to do this from a Western-based perspective, because just like Vasant Lad taught my mentor, Dr. Pete actually wrote the textbooks. I mean, it's I always go back to that. Like, if you heard me on Ben Greenfield's podcast, it's like, how did I get put in the position to directly work with, and probably one of the last people that my mentor or one of the only people that my mentor ever mentored personally as another doctor, like, how did I get put in that position? Dr. Vasant Lad is the foremost, basically, authority in Ayurveda. He came from India. He came in the United States to teach Ayurvedic medicine, to essentially practice and teach. He sets up a university. My mentor studies with him there. He really thinks that she understands it. She writes his textbooks for him by literally breaking down his lectures, right? And she writes the textbooks. then I get to study under her. Like it's mind-blowing how the planets would have aligned to allow for that to happen. But here's the thing, in one step, and this is why I always go back to these Mindset and Motivation Mondays. What did I do? I kept reading the books. Thousands of books. You do not have to read thousands of books. You absolutely do not have to. You don't, because we're going to keep making things, more straightforward. But then after I read her book, what did I do? I contacted her. I didn't know if anything would come of it. She contacted me back. We connected. And she showed me the world of Ayurvedic medicine. I had already read about Ayurvedic medicine, but I didn't understand it. I didn't get it at that level. And she was the one who was able to make the connection between my genetics, functional medicine with a lab test that I've run, and Ayurveda. Once I already had the genetic component. I had some of that already, right? I understood that. Not the deepest level that she taught me about. I definitely understood the functional medicine part of it because I had studied it so in depth, even before I went back for my doctoral degree in naturopathy. But then she taught me the Ayurvedic piece of how that really matters. And she explained more the intricacies of it. And then I was able to put those three together. And that was it. That was literally it. And then I just went deeper into that. So the 8 branches of Ayurveda are this. The first branch is internal medicine. And we're looking at that. This is really the Ayurveda that we know. We're looking at, though, both mind, body, and spirit. The next branch we're looking at ear, nose, throat. We're looking at another branch called toxicology. We're looking at a fertility reproductive-based branch, also known as the aphrodisiac-based branch. But it really has to do with fertility and has to do with the reproductive system. Anything to do with that, of course. Surgery. A lot of people don't know, but a couple thousand years ago, they still had surgery. They're the father of plastic surgery, who did many, many rhinoplasties, believe it or not. A lot of people don't know that, wrote textbooks on it, and the doctors of today really owe the founder or the first doctor of plastic surgery. Pediatrics, and this actually concerns prenatal as well. So there's so much prenatal-based information that I've taken and gleaned from Ayurvedic medicine as well. Geriatrics and rejuvenation. So what are we doing the last, I wouldn't say 60 now. I'd say more around 65. We're doing things a little differently. What we're doing is now we understand that they're moving more into the Vata phase, and we're going to talk about that in terms of the doshas. But again, it's not just body types, it's all of life. So we're moving into the later stage of life. But that later stage of life can last a long time, and you can actually feel so amazing from 65 to 85 if you're doing the rejuvenation-based therapies. And of course, we'll be talking about that on future shows as well. Today is the introduction to Ayurveda, right? We're going to get in-depth on each piece of it. But remember, this is a 5,000 to 6,000 year old form of medicine that's still practiced today, that's still taught today, and that's as relevant today, if not more so than ever, because we're missing it more than ever. And it was almost forgotten for hundreds of years when Britain came into India and they really indoctrinated everyone into the conventional medicine-based form. But over the last 30 to 40 years, it's really had a resurgence. And it's beautiful to see that. Really, really amazing. And the last part we have is the psychiatry. I would also say more of a philosophy-based branch too, because Ayurvedic philosophy and psychiatry is second to none. And that's because it all comes back to what? It comes back to balance. Ayurvedic medicine is about balancing the body. And they balance the body through this way. They look at everything in the world as made up of 5 elements. They look at it being made up of ether, and I'm going to get back to that one, air, water, fire, and earth. What does that mean? And that's why people literally, if you try to speak this language to a conventional medicine-based doctor, and they're not open-minded, they're going to say, this is insane. What is this thing called ether? What is fire? Nobody has fire in their body. Well, that's because you're trying to translate it literally. You're not keeping an open mind to understand that earth of the kapha body types, right? So the kapha body type would be the earth and the water. And again, we're going to get into the body types next week. So every week, I'm going to try to bring you some Ayurvedic medicine. We're going to build upon that. We're going to build upon it. And I'm going to set up a separate, just a separate sub-podcast just on Ayurveda. It's still under the Cabral concept, but I'll just kind of categorize them in the future. Once we get 30 shows or so on it, I'll just set up a separate one just to make it easier for you. That's the whole thing is, again, I'm not going to stop. I can't stop. This is what I do. This is who I am. It's so ingrained with me that it would be like losing a part of myself not being able to teach. So we're going to go deep on this. So don't feel like you need to figure it all out in week 1. Every week's going to make more sense. And then when you come back to it, oh, I get it. I still do that today. I'm reading Ayurvedic books. I'm reading more of the deeper based philosophies. And I'm like, it's just sinking in at such a deeper level. So it's truly, truly amazing. And I cannot wait to go back and maybe even take a group with me as well to be able to take them through the Panchakarma-based therapy that I talk about in the rain barrel effect, the true rejuvenation. So we have that kapha body type. When we're looking at that, we're looking at, well, what does form solidity? And again, we're looking at the heaviness of the earth and water. We're looking at fire as the transformation, right? So that's more of the pitta. Pitta is movement. It's transformation, whereas kapha is the stability and the solidity. It's heavy, right? It's solid, and that's so, so important to have in our life. And we'll talk about that, how to keep that balanced. Whereas pitta is the transformation. It's the fire. Kapha, we'll talk about, is more of like the younger age, like the kapha stage of life is when the body is growing, right? And then we're looking more from like late teenage into, let's say, mid-30s, maybe even 40s is the pitta-based stage. And then after that would be the vata. The vata is the air and the ether. It means light. It means movement. It's more of the catabolic, right? Whereas the anabolic is more of the kapha, and certainly some pitta in there as well, which leads to the transformation. Because remember, all three of these work together. None of them are ever in isolation. That's what a lot of people miss, is that you never have one without the other. One could be heavier, one could be stronger, I should say, like in the pitta body type. It's fire and water, right? But it's not so much water that puts out the fire. And so the fire leads to the heat, and it leads to that transformation. Again, I know that this is getting deep, right? But we're going to talk about this. That's why we're not going to do it all in one show. And so what I like to say is those 5 elements, ether, which is everything around us. It is everything around us. There's the air, right? So the vata is the air and the ether, but the ether is everything that connects us. So it's a beautiful thing. There's other ways to state that. And again, I will talk about that more as we go into the vata, pitta, and kapha body types and their 10 subtypes or the 10 total subdoshas next week. So a lot of people just think that there's vata, pitta, and kapha. They say, oh, I'm a pitta. And I'm like, nah, kind of, but not really. Like you're part of that. You're like 65% pitta, but you have, let's say, 30% kapha and 5% vata. Like there are different body types. There are different doshas, and we're going to get into that. We're going to get into how to classify that. And that's then, again, I want to get too deep into this now, but that's your prakriti, and that's your genetics. But then there's your phenotype. That's who you become, your vakriti. And that's so, so important, because a lot of times you need to balance the state that you're in right now. And then when you balance the state that you're in right now, which is not your normal, it's not your actual genetics, that is not your prakriti, that's not your natural dosha, then you get back, once you're healthy, you get back to that natural dosha, and you feel so much better, right? So your dosha is essentially not balanced if you're not at the weight you want, if you're not at the wellness that you want, and if you're aging too rapidly. Understand that. You're pushing one part of you too hard. You are not balanced. So what we're always looking to do, understand this, is that Ayurveda is looking to create balance. And it's not just one thing. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples. A lot of people think Ayurvedic medicine is like, oh, it's about practicing yoga, and it's about practicing meditation, and it's about practicing veganism. Well, although some of those things at the certain times could be very, very helpful, that's not what Ayurveda is about. Ayurveda is not going to tell someone that's in a deep kapha-based state to do slow yoga, meditation, and they're not going to tell someone that's in a vata-based state to go completely like lettuce and salads and cold food and vegan. They're not going to say that. So that's why when people are preaching one specific diet, I can say, okay, I can get behind that for these people. And then someone else is preaching another diet and say, okay, yeah, I can get behind that for these people. But what other gurus are trying to do, and again, I'm not like, I'm making fun a little bit, I'm joking around a little bit, because again, I know no one means any harm, and of course, I'm not coming down on anyone, but you have to understand, when you preach one thing for everyone, you're automatically wrong. Like right out of the gates, you're automatically wrong. You're like, you can't be right. Because we can look at all the people in this world and you can say, oh, this person right here, they're 5'6", and this person, they're 5'6". One person has very large calves and thick wrists and big hands. The other person has no calves at all, very, very thin, right? And very thin wrists. Both are great people. Both are great human beings, right? But one is more of the vata body type, and one is more of the kapha body type. Are you telling me they should be on the same diet, right? Or the same exercise plan? That vata body type, they can eat like 3,000 calories a day, as many carbs as they want, they never gain weight. And that kapha body type, again, we're going to be teaching more of this next week. That kapha body type, they can only eat like 1,600 calories, almost half of what the other person can, just to try to maintain that same weight. Or they probably even weigh another 30 pounds than that person at 5'6". But that's their body type. And it doesn't mean they need to be overweight. And the same with that Vata body type. That does not mean they need to be underweight and aging much more quickly and getting the osteoporosis, because that's not what that means. What it means is that they need to balance their body type. So what I'm saying is Ayurveda is not one thing. Your diet should not be one thing. Same with exercise. What it means is this. Ayurveda is trying to tell us this. And I write about this. I write about this in the Rain Barrel Effect in my de-stress-based protocol. It's the last half of the book. I tell you exactly how I practice. With that book, The Rain Barrel Effect, I meant to do two things. One, tell you how you got here today, right? How you've maybe gotten off track, why you're not at the weight that you want, why it's more difficult to keep the weight off, why you don't have as much energy as you'd like, and why you might not be as healthy or aging faster. And then what I said is, and here's what I do in my clinical practice. Because I know that I can't work with everyone in the world. And I know that not everyone's going to go to our website and purchase one of the functional medicine lab tests to do at home. What I wanted to do was say, hey, here's at least a place to start. And a lot of people, it might be all they ever need, right? And so that's what I was trying to do. But you have to understand this. I want you to understand it at such a deep level. That Ayurveda is essentially, it's simplistic in what it's telling you, but it's really, really deep. The simplistic part would be like this. If you're tired, you need to sleep more. If you have a lot of chest congestion, ear, nose, and throat issues in the winter, you need more heat because you have this dampness of kapha. So it says you need more pitta. If you can't lose weight, well, metabolism's low. What do we need to do to boost up that metabolism? Get the anabolic part of the pitta-based hormones and the metabolism of the vata, right? If you have an autoimmune issue like rheumatoid arthritis, what's really going on? Well, you have something called vata ama. It means that you have a breaking down, a catabolic nature of the joints caused by ama toxicity. Again, we'll get deep into this for sure. What if you have osteoarthritis? Not the autoimmune kind, but osteoarthritis. Well, now with osteoarthritis, you have a vata-based disorder. Not necessarily the toxicity with it, but vata, breaking down. What do you need? Well, a vata pacifying plan. You need more of that kapha in your life, less of the vata. And again, we can talk about what that means next week. Well, what if you have mental health-based imbalances? Let's say that you do have depression. Well, you're suffering from more of a kapha, a lower-based issue. And we need more towards pitta. And I've talked about this before, which is like one step up. Like if the body's depressed and it's low, by even getting angry, by going against something that helps for so many people, I'm not willing to do this anymore. That's how I got out of my low points in life. I said, I don't know how to get well, but I'm not going to be a victim. And I got mad, and that brought me into the pitta. So I was out of that low kapha state. And then eventually, of course, that led me to the next step, and I could begin to balance my body. But what if we have anxiety? Right? What if we have anxiety? Well, what do we need? Well, what we need is to lower that vata-based state. No longer a kapha state. Kapha would be more of the depression. Vata would be the anxiety, the movement, right? The movement. You have too much solidity, too much lowness, too much heaviness in kapha that leads to the depression. But vata can be too much anxiety. Pitta can be too much aggression, right? So we need to cool that fire of the pitta. So that makes now, hopefully it's starting to make sense. Okay, fire, right? A fire out of control, aggression. How do we pacify that? More of that vata, right? More of that kapha to quiet that down, to calm that. So again, none of them are bad. What would be bad is if you have too much of one. That's what Ayurvedic medicine is preaching. So you have to understand the body is always like a teeter-totter. It's always going up and down, trying to create this thing called dynamic equilibrium. When I started the company, Equilibrium Nutrition, I thought to myself, because I'd read so many books, I'm like, what is the word that stands out to me? And it was dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium. I kept reading this in all the bioregulatory books. It's like you need to keep the body balanced. But the problem is that the body's always in a state of dynamic equilibrium, which means that it's always going up and down on that seesaw or teeter-totter. But what's happening is the body's always trying to create equilibrium, which is a balanced state. And that's where Equilibrium Nutrition came from, is trying to create a balanced state within the body. And our Equilibrium Nutrition supplement line, Equilibrium basically labs, but again, they're not our labs, is basically saying, what can we do to help the body get balanced? And this is the same thing they did in Ayurvedic times. When I was over in India, I was in the back room in the beginning because again, like I hadn't tested out yet with the doctors to be able to say, okay, now you can start working with some of the patients. So what I was doing is I was making a lot of the medicinal herbs and I was making the decoctions, which are the drinks that people drank. Like all of these things I was learning to do, and they were all to create balance. I can't get into all of them today because I know I'm already well past my time. But again, I get excited about this topic. I've talked about it for hours before seminars. What I want to do for you, though, is I want to leave you with this, is that Ayurvedic medicine is essentially having the body be able to right the ship, to keep things level. And that is giving your body what it needs, not your friend's body, not your parents' body, not your coworker's body when they're telling you what they do. You need to know what you need for your body in terms of right thinking, because mindset's so important, right? You need to know what the food is that you need, the total quality and the total quantity. You need the sleep, right? How much sleep is right for you? Kapha body type less, Vata body type more. Again, we'll talk more about this. We will. You need the right lifestyle, the love in your life, whatever it is, to make you feel a certain way. And again, we all need these things at different levels, depending on the state that we're in currently, which again would be our phenotype, and then genotype getting us back to our genetics and keeping that balanced. But if you are able to begin to bring more of that into your life, begin to right that teeter-totter, to get that back to level, everything changes. Your body no longer struggles to lose weight. It no longer struggles to get well. Do not age as rapidly. All of that can happen. I'm excited to be able to go into this more in the future. Hopefully this podcast was helpful. If it was, let me know if I'm on the right line, in the right direction. And you can do that just by going to Instagram. It's just Stephen Cabral on Instagram. Let me know on today's post. Of course, check in with me at cabralsupportgroup.com. That's our free private Facebook group. It's just cabralsupportgroup.com is a special link that sends you over there. But thank you so much really for the last 900 shows. I mean, it's been an amazing ride. I never thought we'd be where we are today. Honestly, never thought that. I just try to, hopefully I'd be able to teach maybe a couple hundred people. Now it's grown to be such an amazing community. So thank you so much. I truly am grateful. And of course, if today's show was helpful, please do feel free to pass it on to anyone you believe it could serve. I want to sincerely thank you for your support of this podcast. I couldn't do it without you, and I mean that. I truly do. I also want to make sure you knew that we now have multiple ways for you to find your answers to the most difficult health, wellness, weight loss, and anti-aging questions. You can find podcast-specific topics like thyroid, adrenal, hormones, sleep, digestion, Ayurveda, and many more at stephencabral.com/podcasts that will then link you to your favorite Apple, Spotify, and other podcast players. Plus, all new podcasts and weekly exclusive video content is being added to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Stephen Cabral. And that's Stephen with a PH. Head on over and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the exclusive content. Lastly, if you've ever found any of my podcasts or books to be helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on iTunes or your favorite media player for the podcast. Rating and subscribing to the YouTube and podcast allow me to reach more and more people and help spread my mission of healing throughout the world. Thank you again for being a part of this movement.